Tony Blair and the United Nations attempted to subvert democracy by bypassing national governments and forcing through climate legislation that nobody really wanted. Hello everyone, this is the Lois and Andre Climate Change Show on the Car26 YouTube channel. And I have to say, I'm so excited to be here in this amazing new studio with this amazing co-host.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here and happy to be doing the show, Andre.
Absolutely. Listen, this story really amazed me from the Financial Times, from Petilla Clark, who was saying that effectively what was going on with the COP projects was that people like Tony Blair were going to the United Nations, arguing that there should be all sorts of crazy net zero policies. And then they wanted to use the public to sort of force their own governments into adopting all of them and almost make it circular. So once again, and we've seen this before, Lois, with things like the European Union, where suddenly we end in a position where all the vested interests are making all the decisions through their conduits. Look, can you tell us a little bit about COP? Because I never realised it was as insidious as what I've now discovered off this story.
COP26 was basically an extraordinary gravy chain exercise. When I went up there, I actually got thrown out. I don't know if you know about it.
Congratulations.
Yeah, no, I know. I got thrown out live on Talk TV, actually.
Before we talk about anything else, you've got to tell us about being thrown out.
Okay, so I was doing the interview with Mike Graham and I was in the media area. I'd managed to use an ex-boyfriend of mine to actually get me into COP. Otherwise, there's no way I would have been able to get in there.
You copped off?
So, no, it was a long time ago. But anyway, so he got me in there. I was in there. There was no way they would have given me a ticket, seeing as my organisation is absolutely against everything they stand for. Anyway, I was about to do the interview on Mike Graham's show. Somebody spotted me. Two guys in suits came towards me, and being an Essex girl, I thought, right, I know what's going on here. So I ran to the disabled toilet with Mike Graham on my phone live on Talk TV. And so I went into the toilet and they were banging on the door. And Mike said to me, so this is all going out, live. He said, so don't they want to talk about climate change then? Don't they want to have a debate? I said, what do you mean don't they want to have a debate? I said, they're banging on the door to throw me out. There's no free speech here. But the whole thing was just vested interest.
Well, but this is the thing that amazes me and worries me, because you know, there's often this sort of priestly class, isn't there, in these international organisations?
Yeah.
You don't know who they are. You don't know what they do. I was really worried when the whole coronavirus thing broke out. And this isn't a channel to talk about coronavirus. We're all about climate change.
No.
But that Dr. Ted Ross from the World Health Organization, you think, who is this bloke? He's just a communist Chinese apparatchik. And then similarly, you see situations where all of our political leaders are being flown to Davos to listen to vested interests. And then in the end, ordinary people go to the ballot box like they did this week in the local elections. Whichever way they vote, nothing changes.
Nothing changes. I mean, they say with the whole green agenda, it's like it's the watermelon. It's green on the outside, red on the inside, and it really, really is. Anyone who thinks that this whole thing is purely about saving the planet, climate change is mistaken. It's a risk that, quite openly, no conspiracy theories. You've got King Charles talking about it. You've got everyone talking about it. They're seeing this as an opportunity to have a reset in terms of how we live, in terms of how we travel, in terms of how we pay for things or not pay for things, in terms of having cash in your pocket. This is about control. Really
I mean, look, I always think that there's an element here where people like this will jump on any bandwagon in order just to push the nanny state agenda. And actually, I don't even think necessarily they're all bad people, though I think Blair is. But I don't think they're all bad people, but they just always want to solve people's problems. They always want to get involved, stick their beak in.
Absolutely, but I do think there's something slightly more full on going on with this particular thing, because I think that it's such a brilliant thing. You can't see it, you can't solve it. The whole climate change thing, whether it's getting warmer, then it's getting colder, then there's a thunderstorm. Everything is connected to this. Also, we need to tax you more. We need to control your movements. Everything is evidence that you need to be more controlled and have less control over your own life.
Look. Here's my thing about all of this. You've introduced me to a whole load of stuff about climate change and whatever. Look, I personally believe that we are moderates on this subject, simply because I'm personally anti-pollution.
Absolutely.
I don't want polluted cities. I mean, you look at the smogs that exist in Victorian England. As we moved away from coal, we got rid of that, which was fantastic. A lot of people would get sick of those coal-fired homes and so on and so forth. But what worries me is that unless you are willing to destroy our economy, unless you're willing to get rid of every car, unless you're willing to do this crazy 15-minute city thing, then suddenly you're portrayed as some sort of psychopath.
Absolutely, but that's the best way to shut somebody down. Have an ism. So you're either a racist, or you're homophobic, or you're this, or you're that. There has to be an ism, or just you're accused of just being you don't care about other people. You don't care about the planet. I mean, it's a bit of pagan-y, Gaia worshipy type stuff. You know, the way this whole thing's being portrayed. It is a bit of a cult.
Well, look. There's so many. Well, how do you spell cult?
Apparently, I've got a cult following. But Kenneth Williams said that in an interview once. Apparently, I'm a cult. So I think, don't say that too quickly.
But you've raised loads of questions for me, and this is the first episode. So whilst we're going to base this channel on news of climate change, and I want everyone to subscribe, by the way, please do, but also hit the bell notification icon, because it's the best way to absolutely guarantee you'll get all the Car 26 videos as soon as they're released. But you asked about religion. So you suggested paganism. Look, I often look at what's taken place with the whole climate movement. You've got this priestly class, haven't you? Everybody, it's incredible.
Ceremonies, did you see them?
Oh, it's incredible. It's incredibly fatalistic as well. And I don't want to be critical of our religion, but then in Greta Thunberg, a child is born to save the sins of the world, and you think it's just. I think
the ultimate saint martyr type
exactly
thing. I
right.
mean, they were always 12, 13-year-old Virginia girls, the ones that had the vision of the Virgin Mary. They were, whether you're going from Lourdes to everywhere else. So there is a tradition of this. The slightly prepubescent girl who's put up as some sort of religious figure. And you're right.
So can I ask you then? Is there an element of young people getting involved with all of this climate change stuff because they just don't have any direction because of the loss of religion?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're absolutely right. And I think they think that it makes them good people. With all religions, there's an element of self-sacrifice, isn't there?
Yes.
So you have to have sacrifice something so that you can be a good person and do better. And I do. I think there is a replacement. And I think the people that have cultivated, for want of a better word, this cult, they know what they're doing. They're not stupid.
No.
You've got amazing branding, and also where has all the anti-capitalism marches gone? They haven't gone. They're just called Extinction Rebellion now. They're just called Just Stop Oil, which, by the way, is funded by Getty. The capitalists are funding the anti-capitalists. So
but that then brings me on to my next fundamental question in this first episode. I see young people getting involved in Extinction Rebellion, getting involved in Just Stop Oil, and I wonder whether they are all generally very privileged people. I think we can all accept that. Are they people who are so privileged that they don't have to care about damaging the economy, or are they people who can say to themselves, "Well, look, actually, let's do this for a couple of years, and then when I work for Goldman Sachs, my image has been shone up preemptively"?
Yes, but I also think that they don't realise that what they're doing, the ultimate aim of what they're doing is that there won't be a job for them eventually in an office. Because the ultimate, to cut CO2 emissions means you are cutting everything. It means you're not going to an office. It means there's no commerce. It means there's no capitalism. So if they think they're just doing it for a couple of years, then they're going to go into
somebody came on my Talk TV show and they said to me that they didn't want net zero. They wanted absolute zero CO2.
Were they sitting there naked?
Well, exactly.
Because every single item of their clothing would have been made. When you and I are talking right now, we're creating CO2.
Yes.
Life is CO2. The whole thing is it's worthy of debate at the very least. It's worthy.
Look. I've no problem with anybody turning around and saying, "Look, we don't want to alter the balance of the atmosphere." I've no problem with that. This is going to sound like zealotry, but I'm not overly worried whether CO2 changes the climate or not. And I'll tell you why. Because genuinely, I think we will solve the problem of emitting too much CO2 just by technological advancement. My concern is that these guys are real Luddites who are kind of sat there going, well, let's not put technology forward. I mean, it's
worse than that. Because actually, if you go, they're talking about not having cars, not doing this, not doing that, going back to some sort of like feudal medieval England. At least they were farming. At least their lords gave them a little bit of land. I mean, I know they had to pay rent or whatever, but and they were allowed horses. Yeah, we won't be allowed that because guess what? Farming creates CO2 and horses create CO2. We're going to be literally just sitting still That's the only way that you're not generating any CO2.
And then
what's the point of you, really?
Yeah.
If you're not doing anything or going anywhere.
I mean, also, I'll go even further than that, because I remember Greta Thunberg really offended me. Now, I just think...
Did she?
Well,
no, just once?
Well, no, not just that. Literally, our whole existence offends me. It was like the way Margaret...
How dare you?
How dare you? How dare you? But the thing was, she stood up and she said, we need to end the myth of perpetual economic growth. And you think, well, that's all right for you on a £4 million yacht. But if you're a subsistence farmer in Sierra Leone, we've pulled 1 billion people out of poverty. And I will tell you something.
They don't want 1 billion people out of poverty. They want ultimately the world's population to be reduced.
Yes.
And again, that's not a conspiracy theory. You have people at the very highest levels of all of the international organisations who say it as just this is what needs to happen. But
then you've got all these people who are kind of sat there flying in on private jets. And I do want to talk a little bit about Tony Blair, because Tony Blair, we started this programme talking about him. I look at him there, and he's the ultimate sort of, uppity, lefty, sneering at ordinary people type person. And just, you see him time and time again trying to force an agenda, which I think would be so damaging to people. But what he successfully does is makes it sound virtuous. And I just think...
Yeah, but that's how they do it.
I know, but we always sound like extremist cranks. And
I know, and we're the same ones.
Yeah,
I used to be a Labour supporter, you know that. I was a card-carrying, active member of the Labour Party.
Well, that proves Darwin's theory of evolution.
I canvassed for Blair when I was 15. I went round, I knocked on the doors. I thought, cosy capitalism, socialism, but business working together, tart with a heart, that kind of jazz. I thought it could really, really work. And obviously, I was completely...
But hang on a second. We're talking about how young people get pushed into all of this. I can understand why it's seductive. I can understand why the modern thing's important. I'll tell you what I can also understand.
I called it the third way, didn't
I saw Extinction Rebellion members or supporters were criticised because they went to an Extinction Rebellion protest and then they went to McDonald's afterwards. And I've always thought about that. That is actually an eminently sensible thing to do, because if you are one of these... I
can't eat McDonald's.
No, but...
You do, don't you?
Look at that.
Oh, no.
All bought and paid for.
Although I did have a Coke from McDonald's the other week.
I was thinking the media environment, it's better to call it cola rather than say, would you like some Coke?
I taught someone how to use a McDonald's drive-thru who'd never used one before.
Really?
Yeah, really. Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. That'll get the viewers rushing in. No, but on a serious note, with Extinction Rebellion, I get the impression that if you're a young person at university or at school, you have to go along with this, whether you believe it or not.
Right.
So the smart thing to do in order to not get marginalised is to go along to the protest for an hour, have a bit of a laugh with your mates, then sneak off to McDonald's afterwards. But where that becomes... So that in of itself is not a major problem. Where it becomes insidious is this idea of locking down any sort of dissent, locking down any sort of debate. And in this first show, I just want to ask you about some of the experiences you've had about being labelled an extremist, because you and I know each other. I think of you as a complete moderate. Look, at the end of the day, you're somebody who's all you're saying is, let's not let Granny freeze to death.
Slightly
for
less
the sake
about
of
Attila the Hun.
Yeah. Well, but
I appreciate what you're saying. You're right. I just want there to be a debate. Whenever debate is shut down, there's something up. That makes people suspicious. So, and there has been. I mean, there's a whole channel, BBC, that we have to pay a license fee. We're taxing it, that you're not allowed to have any other view about climate change.
No.
You're not even allowed to talk about it. Why? If 2 and 2 equals 4, then why wouldn't you talk about it?
But it's back to that religious point that you made. It's back to the religious point. What people will say if you were to go to the Islamic State, what they please don't. But
wasn't that the prize? And that was the word that was recently. With the call to prayer as the wake up call. That's very good. That I like that.
But if you were to go to that place, what they would say is look, we're sorry that we're ignoring your views. We're sorry that we're shutting down dissent, but God has told us to do it. Yeah. And I think that there's this element where people at the BBC and other places say, well, okay, but the reason we are doing all this...
the greater good.
It doesn't matter that the ambulance doesn't make it to the hospital. That person was going to die of climate change anyway.
Yeah, well...
And that's a very dangerous thing.
Well, I mean, it's never worked for me. I've quite often said to people, God has told me that you have to buy me this handbag, and it doesn't work. I just think, maybe I'm saying it wrong. Maybe the Islamic State could teach me some new tricks. I don't know.
I think the Islamic... let me tell you, there's many women I know that need to put a bag over their head. You are not one of them.
Oh, well, that's nice. That's good,
but now on to the whole idea of this circular process that we talked about at the beginning. The whole idea that vested interest will go to Davos, vested interest will go to the UN, and then they will push their own agenda. Everyone agrees at these meetings. As you said, you got thrown out for not even disagreeing, literally being alive in that sense.
Literally existing in Glasgow at that time,
So you got thrown out. But then, of course, what they were talking about in the FT was this concept of then money then being poured into supporting all these agendas locally. So, of course, what you're saying now is, what I'm taking from what you said is, we've got the whole thing going on with the vested interests like Tony Blair.
Yeah.
Then we've got COP, which pushes it through in the UN. And then there's supporters in the media at places like the BBC who get the public to then lobby their government against government advice.
And they think they're rebelling. This is the funny thing. You've got all these kids doing these protests and they're just supporting the globalist view. And
yes.
What?
But I mean, the other thing is we don't want to sound like tinfoil hats wearing nutters. But at the same time, when you're talking about these sort of one world governments, right, which I don't really believe in, but at the end of the day, this is the direction of travel these people are on, where whichever way you vote, Tony Blair decides in Davos.
Absolutely, yeah, because if he takes over not
the media.
Yeah, but if he takes over the
whole narrative.
The whole narrative, then it will be him, and it won't matter if you vote for Rishi, it won't matter if you vote for Keir, because they're both two sides of the same coin.
And I've seen that with Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer.
It's the same policies. He's got the same policies.
There's no dissent on the net zero. Now, can I tell you the other thing that really annoys me? This whole concept.
Apart from Greta.
Well, I mean, it all annoys me. Like, look at me. I'm becoming a grumpy old man with every
passing. You're becoming a grumpy old man. I'm sorry, Andre.
God, I love working with you. but you know, what annoys me is that we were talking about the cost of living crisis, which I think is a legitimate thing. I think it's legitimate to say, well, we're overly reliant on Russian oil and gas. I accept that. Yeah. And we need to have a better energy mix. But the one thing that nobody's talking one thing that nobody's talking about seriously is fracking. One thing that nobody's talking about seriously is just suspending or slowing down the net zero, just so Granny doesn't freeze in the meantime.
Because this is my belief is it's nothing to do with the planet saving the planet and everything to do with a complete realignment of our way of life, Andre, because we're not using any less oil and gas. You know that, don't you? We're just sending. China's making the stuff for us and sending it over. We're just buying it in.
Well, let me tell you a little story, and it's not related to energy, but I think it is very telling. When the European Union brought in its whole landfill tax thing, I think it was £85 a tonne. Suddenly, that was to encourage more local authorities to recycle. And recycle, quote unquote, is precisely what they did.
Yeah.
What happened was there was not the capacity globally to recycle at the levels that the European Union was now forcing people to go to. So what they did was they sent all their rubbish to the port of Southampton, and they sent it to be recycled in China. Now, China has now banned plastic from being imported into waste plastic from being imported
in the sea.
Of course, they're tipping it in the sea. China, it created an environmental catastrophe in China because they just dug a big hole.
How is that helping the environment?
Well, it's not, because now you've got to the stage where what you're now doing is, rather than having it dissipate across rubbish dumps across the UK, you're now sticking it in one big hole in China, but you're literally paying.
But it's the whole world doesn't have borders in terms of emissions and things like that, which just shows you it is all a little bit of a scam. Or, at the very least, it's worthy of a debate. I mean, you've got this whole carbon offsetting things, and our government will pay companies £250 per tonne to offset carbon CO2. But countries in the third world could do it for £10 a tonne. So, even if you believe the whole CO2 stuff, which I believe is up for debate at the very least, why is our civil service paying companies $200?
Actually, do you know what? I'm sorry to divert off, but this is something I'd love to nail on this first show that we do together.
Okay.
Right? Does it matter whether you believe that CO2 affects the environment or not? Let me explain what I mean by that.
Okay.
Because I genuinely believe, even if CO2 is the number one issue. CO2 creates climate change and all that. Actually, my argument, which is we will get there in terms of stopping CO2 emissions or reducing them anyway, and I think would mitigate that. But also, I genuinely believe the debate is not carbon, the debate is not CO2. The debate is moving to this net zero position so quickly that we plunge people into poverty.
Net zero, ultimate net zero, it means deindustrialization.
Yes.
Deindustrialization means anti-capitalism. Anti-capitalism means Marxism, neo-Marxism.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is what we're dealing with here. Okay, that's not tinfoil hat.
No.
You know, international, global organisations, government organisations, even our own government right now will tell you that. Actually, if you ask them, if you catch them at a quiet moment. I mean, I've spoken to current Lords and House of Lords at the moment who told me they've seen documentation that said there'll be no cars, no or highly reduced private car ownership. 15 years. That's the plan.
But see that what worries me about that. So
it's no business, no white van man.
Yeah, but I actually, so I don't care whether everyone owns a car or not, but I think they should have the choice to.
Absolutely.
But if nobody wants a car, that's fine.
Yeah.
But always remember, we have seen recently with all these strikes, Len Trotsky and that other one, Mick Lynch. The reality is, you are handing political power in Britain to them.
Absolutely. It's like that dinner. There was a train strike that you were going to come to my dinner.
That's right.
And there's a train strike. You literally couldn't get there. Yeah, and that would mean that as you say, the decisions are made on days by the unions in the same way that the coal miners used to control everything.
That's absolutely right. The other thing that worries me about cars is this. Look, I genuinely believe that electric cars are the future, and I'll tell you why. Because it appears to be better to have just the motor rather than have if you like, the power station plus the motor. But the problem is the technology is not ready.
Yeah, and
these enormous
there's not
batteries.
enough minerals in the world for them either. And also the minerals are mined using little kids that are slaves. So yes, okay, on the surface maybe they might be, but actually I love my petrol car.
Yeah, but all we are doing, I suppose my point is, all we are doing with this is that we know that the battery technology is not sufficient for us. And so what we'll do is we'll push that out first, even though the technology is not ready. Now, I think there's a significant danger associated with that.
Yeah, but it's not a danger for them, because I believe that their agenda is to get people off the road.
I think that's right.
So if it's not that, for us, it's a danger. But actually, if your intention is that you don't want people to be driving, it's great. Yeah. It actually works out really, really well. So
yeah, and I suppose the other thing that we've got to raise the issue of when you're talking about cars, when you're talking about driving, is this whole thing that these guys appear not to find bizarre. This whole idea that you fly in on your private jet and lecture people about climate change. I mean, God bless the King, and this is an important weekend for us with the coronation. But he refused to have the name of a Heathrow terminal named after him because he said he doesn't want to be associated with air travel. He's a pilot. I mean, it's just, but
as Orwell said, we are all equal, but some of us.
Yeah, do as I say, don't do as I do.
Yeah.
I suppose my question about that then is this. I remember reading an article, it might have been in the New York Times, I forget where it was, so apologies to whoever wrote it if I've got that wrong, but saying that actually this whole idea of one rule for you and one rule for me actually enforces me in my position as a celebrity. So actually you can be Emma Thompson. It does make sense that the little people can't fly, but you can have a private jet. Sorry, I think she travels first class BA to fly back.
She's the only, but I've met, in my time in media, a number of celebrities, obviously, and she's been the most rude woman I've ever met in my life. Yeah, Emma Thompson. Yeah, like really, really horrible.
I've met some rude women in my time, but it depends what your definition of rude is.
Okay, you don't include me in that, do you? Do you want me to put a bag over my head?
Well,
not yet!
It wasn't nasty rude I was talking about.
Oh, right, okay.
But look, in reality, we don't seem to have got a lot of traction on the whole idea that flying in by private jet to a climate change conference is unacceptable.
No,
I mean, people like us will talk about it, make a joke about it. It's exactly the same as Sadiq Khan trying to shut down the streets of London, but he's got a motorcade.
A motorcade, yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Outriders, is that what they're called?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he has that all the time, but
no.
Why do you think that we as a group of people, not just you and I, have been so spectacularly bad at persuading people? Because I feel like sometimes we're losing the argument. You were talking, Lois, about people being plunged into genuine poverty, talking about kids eating rather than eating, and still at the same time, the trajectory is that they're winning.
Yeah, but I think that it's because we've only opened the debate recently. I think it's only in the last 15, 16 months that we've actually opened the debate. I think that there's more, the polling that we did, my organisation did with Car 26 when we started, this is when we started with all the propaganda, was that 58% of those who expressed an opinion wanted a net zero referendum. It's now 62%. That's a lot.
That's huge,
That
actually.
is huge.
So
Yeah.
do you,
But
so,
there's no party to vote for.
But
with reforms. Yeah.
but do you think then? Do you think that there's a relationship? And by the way, there might not be. I don't know. You're going to have to teach me as we do these shows.
Okay.
But is there a relationship between this idea of the net zero thing in the European Union? And the reason is because in my mind, I see the Tony Blairs of this world.
Yeah.
I see the Alistair Campbells of this world. I see all the usual vested interests who love the EU now decamping to these COP conferences, decamping to Davos, and effectively what they want to do is pat the little people on the head and tell them what to do, and they can't do it through the EU anymore, so now they have to use this.
Everything to do with climate stuff, the taxation, the carbon credits, the this, the that, the whole control element. It's all Marxist. It is.
But then, okay, Lois.
But it is.
No, but there are people going to watch this and going to say, "Oh, she would say that. She's
But
a bit."
why would I say that? I'm a former Labour Party supporter. You know, well, I actually come from a background of socialist capitalists, if that's not an oxymoron.
It is.
I've you know, it's only through what I've did actually since the whole COVID thing, and the more I've learned about the whole CO2 and the whole climate stuff, that it seems to be a good excuse to make people have less control over their lives.
But okay. Are we then saying, or are you saying that actually, whether it be anti-smoking, whether it be anti-alcohol, whether it be a sugar tax, whether it be net zero, whether it be deciding, you know, what you should drive and there are just some people who just want to stick the beak in your business. And actually, you know, if they weren't talking about salt, they'd be talking about climate change. If they weren't talking about climate change, they'd be talking about electric cars. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. But it's a lot more dangerous, the whole climate thing, because literally everything that you and I do produces an output of emissions. Yeah. So if you have to limit emissions, it means that you're not just limiting whether someone has a cake or a cig, but whether they can leave their home, whether they, you know, whether they can even, maybe in the future, like in China, whether you can have more than one baby. There are implications that are so serious, and it's all very gradual.
But okay. Look, 15-minute cities, because you're talking about not being able to leave your home.
Yeah,
now, can I be totally honest with you? I don't fully understand it. So can you explain what the hell they're doing in Oxford?
Right, the concept. Right, okay. So there's a global thing of 15-minute cities, and the idea on the surface of it, ostensibly, is quite good. You know that you have everything you need within 15 minutes. Great. But it should be your choice to whether you walk somewhere or not. Not that you're not allowed to leave the 15-minute city for more than a certain amount of time in your car or whatever. So in Oxford and Cambridge, I think, so you've got Oxford, I believe, is the one that basically, say, for example, you live here and you're on the edge of one of the zones. You can only drive from this road to that zone 100 times a year. Yes. You have 100 passes. So if your nan lives in that road and you want to drive there, I don't know, maybe she can't walk very well. Maybe you want to, or you bought some furniture on eBay.
Maybe the government doesn't know how to run your life.
Maybe you just want to. Yeah, you have to actually, for the 100 days that you're not allowed your permit, you have to go on a massive ring road around the city to go back in the other side. How is that? Tell me how that's better for the environment.
Well, I'll tell you what it is. It comes down to the central theory that Transport for London have as well. And I don't want us always to be London-centric in these shows.
No.
But the idea that Transport for London has, which is, look, let's make it as hard to drive as possible. Yeah. Then let's have roads for the rich and push everyone onto public transport. But part of it that I've noticed with Transport for London, which is in so okay, look, they want to make a few quid off some people and push everyone onto public transport, but they use the excuse of pollution and climate change. But they deliberately cause the traffic jams. It's a policy.
But the emissions and the whole 20 miles an hour thing. The report on that the House of Lords produced recently was about changing attitudes to do with climate and everything, and about behavioural changes. It was actually a psychological report about how you get into people's brains. Using the lessons from COVID, it said.
Oh God, because that went well.
That went so well, didn't isn't it? But no, but they were saying the stuff that worked and the stuff that didn't, in terms of pushing people to do things one way or the other. And it says clear as day in the report, there is no benefit whatsoever to the 20-mile-an-hour thing, apart from getting on people's nerves.
Yeah, well,
and stopping them from driving.
Well, you were talking about COVID and sort of psychology and mental health. I was reading an article the other day, and it really struck me that this was probably true, but I'd love to get your opinion on it. Basically, there was a chap who'd had a bit of a bad episode and had ended up in a mental facility. And he said that what the psychiatrist said to him, or the psychologist, or whoever it is, the professional there, said, look, there are 3 things you need to do now in life. Point number 1, you need to recognise that there is no conspiracy against you. You know, the Jews and the Freemasons are not out to get you. Right? The next point is, you need to stop thinking that there's going to be a catastrophe around the corner. And the third thing you have to recognise is that things that people do does not automatically affect you unless you engage with it. Now, that he's being told that, so don't stop thinking that everything's a conspiracy. Stop thinking
I don't think
that there's a
conspiracy.
No, but hear me out on this. But stop thinking that things are a catastrophe, and stop thinking that people affect you. Now look at this. You know, the conspiracy against you, isn't that the patriarchy? Isn't that the sort of?
But I've never believed it.
No. But these young people are told.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. You're right. There's psychological techniques to make people think they can take it insane.
The next thing is the catastrophe. These young people have been told
Armageddon,
that Armageddon is coming.
Yeah.
And the other thing is the reason that they have no platform people on campuses now. This idea that if somebody says something that you disagree with, that hurts you. Now, what this guy said in the article, which I thought was astonishing, was he said, look, these young people who do this are symptomatic of mental health problems, admittedly on a low level. But what you would not do in a mental health facility is you would not say the world's going to blow up in 6 months. Oh, yes, you're correct. Let's try and do something about it.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't. No, you'd say, right, you need to calm down, dear.
The Germans are tunneling under my house. Well, let's deal with that by putting concrete down. Or somebody on the TV is subliminally sending me messages. Let's no platform them from the TV.
No, you're right. You don't buy into the whole madness. You just say it's madness.
You're mad.
Let's help you. But I completely agree with you.
I mean, I think it's crazy. Now, look, I want to talk a little bit before we go about what this channel's going to be doing.
Okay.
So every single week we're going to have the Lois and Andre Climate Change Show, where we're going to talk about the big issues of the week. But I think we're going to have some fun as well.
I think we're going to have some fun. As long as I don't have to wear a bag over my head. No?
Not regularly.
Not regularly.
It's the only way she doesn't put the makeup on. Also, we're going to be putting out regular content right across platforms. We're going to be putting out short videos. So as I said this earlier, we really want you to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell notification icon. It's the best way to absolutely guarantee you get all of our videos as soon as they are released. Of course.
I think we're going to have fun, Andre, don't you?
Oh, I'll tell you something else. You can put some questions in the comments. I read as many of the comments as I can because it's really important. And we'd love to interact with you simply because, this is a battle. This is something that is going to affect everybody's lives. We are now talking to people who've been pushed into poverty. Ordinary working people who shouldn't be struggling with bills are struggling with bills because of the loss of this agenda. And we've also made a pledge. We're going to allow the moderates to speak because the reality is we don't think that making Granny freeze to death for the sake of a windmill is sensible. And we think it's perfectly moderate to say that shouldn't happen. And so that is the Lois and Andre show going forward.
Yeah.
We're going to leave some details about how to get in touch with the show straight after this. And we'll see you next week. Till then, goodbye.